This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, and then their tool will provide options from other companies, so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Hey everyone, you will hear an unbleeped curse word or two in this episode. All right, as you were. When I asked reporter Brandi Buchman what it was like inside the E. Barrett Prettyman courthouse last week in D.C., her answer surprised me.
It was basically like, imagine it's the end of summer camp, except it's the worst summer camp you've ever been to.
You could call it the summer of sedition. Brandi's been following along, as first 4 Oath Keepers got sentenced for their role on January 6th, and then 5 members of the Proud Boys learned their fate. Many of them were charged with the rarely prosecuted crime of seditious conspiracy, that is, the organized encouragement of rebellion against the government. It's a crime that's almost never brought in front of a jury at all.
It's even less common that it's successfully prosecuted. The evidence was overwhelmingly strong.
The final sentencing was for Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys. He stood in front of the judge in an orange jumpsuit and a full beard. And when he spoke, it was the first time he'd opened his mouth at trial. It was a plea for mercy, sort of.
You know, he sort of played everything down and said that he had doubts about whether or not the election was stolen in December of 2020, right before the Stop the Steal rally. But yet he told the court he didn't opt to sort of turn away or get away from what he was doing because he felt like he would be criticized or ridiculed. And I found that to be a particularly difficult argument to believe because so much of what we saw and so much of what we know about Tarrio as a figurehead on the far right, this is a person, he doesn't take orders from anybody.
His whole brand is bravado.
Right, exactly.
How long of a sentence did the judge give Tarrio?
For Tarrio, 22 years.
Wow.
And the government was asking for 33.
That's the longest sentence of any of the people who've been charged with crimes for January 6th.
It is. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this credo the Proud Boys have, F around and find out. Like there's video of them chanting it on January 6th while they're marching, with a Washington Monument in the background. Do you feel like Enrique Tarrio and his co-defendants feel like they've effed around and found out at this point?
I don't think that there's anything inside of these folks that thinks, I really got to take a step back here and I got to think about what I'm doing because I quote unquote just found out. I mean, I don't think that largely exists for them.
Today on the show, the government just handed down some of the longest prison terms yet for January 6th. Will it make a difference? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
Amplify your career through training and development solutions specifically designed for federal government professionals. From courses to help you attain or retain certification, to individualized coaching services, to programs that hone your leadership skills and business acumen, Management Concepts optimizes your professional development. Online, in person, individually, or groups, it's training that's measurably better. Learn more at managementconcepts.com. That's managementconcepts.com.
Sometimes things in the world of technology are complicated and need careful explaining. Sometimes they just need a little hard truth.
I don't think anyone is going to buy a banana with crypto at any point in the foreseeable future.
I'm Lizzie O'Leary, the host of Slate's What Next TBD, your clear-eyed guide to technology, power, and the future. Friday and Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts.
So, Brandi, you've had something like a front row seat to all the sedition proceedings in D.C. I'm just wondering, what's it been like to experience the justice system up close like this? Because how many of the trials have you watched?
I've covered all of the Oath Keepers' first sedition trial, and then all of the Proud Boys seditious conspiracy trial. You know, I was outside of the Capitol on January 6th. I was covering the certification that day. I watched all of that happen up close and personal. And then I pretty much have been devoting my beat to unwinding that day since it happened. And so to get to that point and to finally see all of these people in the room, and in some cases to hear them talk, it was very intense. You know, it was there. These are historical cases and they have major legal importance, I think, for our country going forward.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about two organized groups here, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. Can you just lay out for us what they were both doing on January 6th?
Yeah. So kind of key difference and key thing to understand about these two groups. Now, the leader of the Proud Boys and the leader of the Oath Keepers, Henry Tarrio and Elmer Stewart Rhodes, they were at least in contact one time before the insurrection, at least one time. And that was on January 5th.
Would you call it coordinating?
I wouldn't call it coordinating because I don't have enough to support that as a statement. And that's not what the government pursued. But I think that when you sort of look at all of the information, and we know that they met in this garage on the 5th.
A lot of this meeting got caught on tape. There was a documentary crew following Tarrio around, and prosecutors released the footage.
Hey, she's from Texas.
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So is Enrique.
Hello. And Stuart, pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
There was some coordination that existed in the sense that there was this moment where we listened to the video from the garage, and there's a voice in the garage who says, you know, we have to do it together and we have to do it fast.
Huh. I mean, that sounds a little bit like coordination.
It sure does. But the problem was the voice was off camera and nobody could identify who the speaker was. And so the government didn't particularly push for that because it would be a hearsay issue. So, you know, I think that didn't totally get resolved. But what we did see was that both of their groups benefited from one another being there to effectively stop Congress from doing its certification.
Because they defended each other?
Not so much that they defended each other, but if all of these forces were acting separately, the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys were acting separately that day, as far as we know, they certainly benefited from their, you know, mutual concerted actions to break down barriers, get past police, and get into stop proceedings.
I want to focus in on Enrique Tarrio and what happened with him, both because his sentence was the longest and also the most recent. I'm wondering if you can just start off by telling me the story of Enrique Tarrio's January 6th, because as many people have noted, he wasn't even there that day, but really his January 6th started a few days before. So can you explain how?
His January 6th started more than a few days before. I think, you know, what we found was he formed a group inside of the Proud Boys called the Ministry of Self-Defense. This was after Trump had made the stand by comment on December 19th at the presidential debates.
This is when Trump was asked to basically back away from...
to disavow them.
Yeah, and he did not.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
And what we found, and this, really came out at Proud Boys, was that was like a clarion call. That was a huge recruitment effort.
By the time the election rolled around, a month or so later, the Proud Boys were ready to defend Trump no matter what. They set up camp in D.C., making the city's oldest hotel into their unofficial headquarters. They roamed the streets, looking to fight with people they claimed were Antifa. The month before the Capitol riots, Enrique Tarrio himself got accused of ripping down a Black Lives Matter banner from in front of a historically Black church and burning it. There were consequences for that. When Tarrio returned to D.C. to take part in January 6th, D.C. police arrested him, and he was actually forced to leave town. But Brandi says that's exactly what he wanted.
His arrest on the 4th was something that he had calculated. I think he knew that it would ultimately inspire fellow Proud Boys to react on the 6th. It would kind of mobilize them. And incidentally, what we saw in footage from the 6th were lots of Proud Boys walking around with T-shirts that said, Enrique Tarrio did nothing wrong. I think that he wanted to just really kind of whip everyone into a frenzy. Tarrio knew, and other leaders knew, that they could manipulate people's outrage in such a way to mobilize them to show up on the 6th. And that's more or less what happened. But as for Tarrio, after he got arrested, he went to a hotel in Baltimore after he went to an underground meeting with Rhodes in D.C.
That meeting in the garage.
That's right. And he sat and he watched. He watched the rioting unfold. He watched the violence unfold.
Was he egging it on?
Yes, he was. We saw text messages where when someone would say to him, what to do or what they thought of it, he said, make no mistake, we did this. I mean, you really can't get more clear than that. It's hard to get outside of an argument that you didn't commit seditious conspiracy when you're saying things like that. And then on top of this, after the fact, and this was another sticking point for Tarrio, both at trial and at sentencing, after January 6th, when a fellow Proud Boy asked him, well, what's next? His response was, do it again.
The government didn't seem to get exactly what it was asking for when it came to the sentencing of the Proud Boys. Like, they were asking for more than 30 years for Enrique Tarrio. He got 22, which was the longest so far, but still, that's quite off the mark for what the prosecutors wanted. What do you make of that?
So I think what it sort of boiled down to with Judge Kelly and the Proud Boys was that he made this distinction where he was willing to apply terrorism enhancements to some of the charges. Where he ended up ultimately departing from the government was while he was willing to label some of these charges terrorism and apply, stiffer sentences accordingly, Kelly didn't feel that the Proud Boys had what's enumerated in some of these statutes for terrorism, that they had intent to kill. And he made a point of talking about that at each of their sentencings. You have to ask yourself, well, if they didn't intend to kill, or at least there was no definitive proof at trial that said, absolutely, they intended to go there not just to stop the certification, but also to kill a bunch of lawmakers. If they didn't intend to kill, well, what were they intending to do? And we saw how violent people were in trying to get past police. And we saw all of what was going on around that. The guillotine out on the lawn, the people saying, kill Mike Pence.
But still, for comparison, like Confederate President Jefferson Davis was jailed for 2 years before being released without a trial. So these sentences are longer than that. These
are very long sentences. And, this is an unpopular thing to say. And I understand, and this is a distinction I like to make, but I understand people are very angry and they want justice and they're outraged and they do not like the Proud Boys ideology. They do not like the Oath Keepers. I understand all of that. But at the end of the day, 10 years is a long time to sit in a prison cell. 15 years is a long time. 17, 18, 22 years. These are more than a decade apiece for each of these Proud Boys. It is a long time to sit in jail and to be away from liberty, your liberties, your family, your life. And I think that there's an argument that what they're given is quite punitive and will hopefully be a deterrent. But only time will tell on that.
After the break, what's going to happen to a group like the Proud Boys now that its leaders are behind bars?
I'm Josh Levine, the host of Slate's podcast 1 Year. In our new season, we're firing up our flux capacitors and taking you way back.
1955.
1955.
We'll bring you 1955's weirdest, wildest, and most captivating stories. You'll learn about forgotten pioneers, like the TV Weather Girls, who took the country by storm.
A cute, sexy young woman was very appealing, and I can quite understand why.
And you'll discover moments from the past that resonate deeply with the present, like how a bizarre conspiracy theory infected the nation's politics.
Oh my God, they're trying to establish a prison camp. This is going to be Siberia, USA.
1 year, 1955. Out now, wherever you listen.
Hey, friend, before you hit fast forward through this ad, let me just bend your ear a tick and tell you all about Slate Plus, Slate's membership program. You know that What Next is going to be here for you, whether there's big breaking news or whether you just want to hear about a story you might have missed. Basically, we've got you totally covered. And we're here thanks to Slate. If you want to support us, and I know you do, the best way to do that is to join Slate Plus. It'll get you all connected with Slate's award-winning journalism. You'll get ad-free podcasts. You'll get Plus exclusive content on shows like Slow Burn and Political Gabfest. And you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. Every new membership helps ensure we can continue bringing you the biggest stories each week. So go on, hit the pause button and go to slate.com/whatnextplus. Again, that's slate.com/whatnextplus. All right, on with the show. All in all, 5 leaders of the Proud Boys got sentenced for their crimes over the last few days, including Enrique Tarrio. For Brandi, these sentencing hearings were a little strange to watch because so many of the men put on these really emotional shows for the judge. Adam Pizzola, a former Marine who was one of the first rioters to bust through a Senate window, teared up as he promised he was done with politics. Joseph Biggs, the only Proud Boy to breach the Capitol twice, was crying too. And Ethan Nordine, a Proud Boy leader from Washington State, offered the judge an apology and called January 6th a tragedy. But then they received their sentences. After hearing he was going to go away for 10 years, Adam Pizzola pumped his fist and said Trump won. Both Biggs and Nordine called into a January 6th vigil after being told they were going to spend more than a decade behind bars. Biggs told the crowd the government can kiss his ass.
And so for all of Biggs's blubbering, and he cried quite a bit when he was sentenced, for all of his blubbering before the judge, it was a completely different song and dance that he was performing the next day.
I don't really get the strategy here, but maybe you can explain it to me. Like, is it just that he doesn't see the judge as his audience anymore?
I think, like, even when we were going through the trial, when the trial was active, Tarrio made a phone call to some podcast and he compared his strife to Nelson Mandela. And ironically, Stuart Rhodes also compared himself to Nelson Mandela after trial. Why they do this, what makes them do this, who they think they're talking to. I think that they're talking to the group of people who they believe will buy into their propaganda. I think they do it as a grift. I think that maybe there's also a chance, sure, they think that they are innocent. And sure, they think that their First Amendment rights were violated.
Is the hope simply pardons here?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's a big part of it.
It seems like a high-risk, high-reward strategy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, they're not going anywhere. And so the only way they're going to keep the money coming in and to keep, to keep people on their side is to keep up the same exact routine that they've kept up this whole time. So it's just a lot of the same. And I think it's also important, like, these groups were really hobbled by these convictions in terms of the Oath Keepers as an organization, the Proud Boys as an organization. The top figureheads of these organizations, they're gone. But that doesn't mean that there's this vacuum where all of the remaining extremist groups out there in the United States, like Adam Waffman or Patriot Front or the 3%ers or any of these groups, they will be, I'm sure, more than happy to come into that vacuum. And that's the thing. It's like they know, I think the Proud Boys especially know who's listening to them, and they still want to save face and they still believe in their organization. When we had defense witnesses at trial, some of our defense witnesses quite literally showed up in Proud Boys colors to testify on behalf of the Proud Boys.
Yeah. I mean, you're referencing this kind of don't back down idea that seems very clear from all of these folks. And I was thinking about that because I read this New York Times coverage of what happened in the Proud Boys sentencing. And the reporter wrote this line, and I just wanted to get your reaction to it. He said the Justice Department has all but decapitated the Proud Boys' national leadership and mostly put an end to its involvement in large-scale and often violent pro-Trump rallies in cities across the country. Is that the complete picture of what's happened here?
I don't know. I don't think it's the complete picture. I think that it's true that we have certainly, as the person said, decapitated the heads of these organizations, and that helps. But we also sort of know how extremism has historically worked in this country. Once it's put under the white hot light of scrutiny, it tends to kind of fizzle out or fall apart or crumble a little, and then it burrows itself down and back into the underground. But now we have this situation in America where a lot of that stuff is not being burrowed. It's not, people are not ashamed to have these really wildly racist, wildly misogynist, far right views. And so I think that there might have been some damage done to these organizations, but so long as individuals like Ron DeSantis, individuals like Donald Trump and the like are out there sort of promoting this xenophobic, wildly white supremacist adjacent or white supremacist worldview, there's always going to be an audience that'll kind of glom onto that and then feel like, oh, well, it's acceptable because it's out in the public. And what we've seen since these Proud Boys have been on trial, since the Oath Keepers have been on trial, are extremist groups showing up at LGBTQ events, showing up to intimidate and effectively terrorize people in their communities and make people who are not a part of their groups feel like they don't belong. And so did these sentences hurt the Proud Boys? Oh, yeah, sure. Did it hurt the Oath Keepers as an organization? Absolutely. I don't doubt that. But is this the end of it? I don't think so, because we know historically that convictions are great. They serve as a certain kind of deterrence, but it's a larger cultural issue that we're dealing with here.
Many folks have made the point that these seditious conspiracy sentencings are kind of the end of one era and the beginning of the next, by which I mean the next phase of January 6th prosecutions is really looking at people like Donald Trump himself, people who were doing something other than storming the Capitol. I sort of wonder what you think these prosecutions that just ended tell you, if anything, about this next phase. And I ask that because I feel like I look at, for instance, the sentencing of Enrique Tarrio, and I think he looks a little like Trump on January 6th. He's not storming the Capitol. He's somewhere else, tweeting. He's doing something very different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the cases here that have ended do sort of set the stage for what's coming for Donald Trump in D.C. with his trial in March. There's no sedition charges involved with Trump's case in the D.C. federal court. But what there is the conspiracy, the effort to obstruct proceedings. And I think that what happened at the trials was this interesting dichotomy of the defense saying, well, the Proud Boys were a scapegoat for Donald Trump because a person like Donald Trump could never be prosecuted for these crimes. And they're just being used as, a wedge. But Donald Trump got indicted for those crimes. He is not above the law. We have found that out, and we will see how this all progresses. But I think that what it says is, look, he helped inspire people to come storm the gates. Trump allegedly did this because he felt there was no last option available to him to stay in power. And so while the conspiracies are not the same between Trump and the Proud Boys, or the Oath Keepers for that matter, what we're looking at is the cause and effect that goes on here, how his behavior motivated people to show up and basically fuel their own conspiracies. Trump lit the match, and they, everything else caught on fire.
Brandi, I'm so grateful for your time and your reporting. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Brandi Buchman is an independent journalist who covered the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys trials. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osborne, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We're led by Alicia Montgomery with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here tomorrow.